I'm a fairly well-off guy. I've got a good job with decent pay and I'm not unattractive. However, I've not had the best of luck with relationships. That's not to say I haven't had any, more rather that the ones I've been involved in haven't ended well. I've been cheated on, told I have too high of expectations, and that I work too much. Not unfair statements exactly, but I made sure that everyone was well informed before we began, so hearing that kind of thing grinds my gears. The idea of buying a wife first came up as a joke. I had been drinking with some mates and explaining to them that my girlfriend had left me over my working late and she thought I was cheating. I wasn't, obviously, and Braden mockingly suggested that I should just fill in an order form for a wife and see how that went. We tossed the idea around for a while, joking about the wife auctions and the misogyny of it, and I left fairly reassured with myself that I did not need to buy a wife. Then I got an email titled, "Find Your Perfect Match." Now normally I would have bypassed such an obvious scam, but then I got to considering what a hoot it would have been next time explaining to all the boys that just days after discussing it I got a scam email and gave it a try. And so I did. I opened the email and followed the link. Almost immediately a private browser started downloading onto my laptop. Horrified, I tried to end the program, but unfortunately it was finished installing so fast that I couldn't even keep up. I'm also not the most computer savvy, in case you couldn't tell. Once the page opened up though, it was honestly not at all what I was expecting. I was waiting for the typical porn-style woman to be advertising where you pay X amount of dollars for every minute of their time. Or maybe for a million viruses and hackers to start trying to break into my computer like you see in movies. Maybe my bank account was just randomly going to be skimmed. I didn't know. Thankfully and unsettlingly, it was nothing like that. Instead, I was asked to fill out a profile form. It didn't ask for anything horribly identifiable, just age, gender, species, race, and sexual orientation. It didn't even require a name. Bemused, I filled out the form and was taken to a terms and conditions page. I skimmed through it as usual. There was something about payment must be made in full before a partner will be shipped. Refunds are not given for return of partner for any reason or for DOA. And all contracts are binding and final until termination. Yeah, okay, I thought. Foresight and common sense are valuable tools, and I encourage others to use them. I, however, clicked the accept button and was directed to a new page. This seemed to be an advertisement page, just in case I wasn't already in deep enough. It went on to explain that although all the partners available were high quality, it was important to select your preferences with care, as you'd only be provided with the closest match. Order a Ferrari, get a chicken nugget, I mused to myself. Still, the advertisement clip continued to explain the process. You fill in your ideals, they fill in theirs, and you'd be matched with someone. Kind of like a dating site, only all sales are final. I was half-heartedly waiting for some explanation of where these people were to come from. When there was no explanation provided, I felt my gut filling with dread as I considered that these partners were probably trafficked victims. That was actually what prompted me to keep going. I decided that I would at least save one girl. I could pay for her, and when she arrived, I'd take her straight to the police station and we'd get help. I briefly worried about the price of such a venture before the rational part of my brain asked me if I cared more about the woman's life or money. The decision was easy from there. Once the advertisement ended, I clicked onward onto the next page, filled with an inflated sense of heroism. Select your preferences, the next page stated. The list was extensive, and honestly it felt more like ordering an elaborate meal than a human being. Everything was set out in a this or that style. Here's some examples of what I mean. Priority for subdued or opinionated. Priority for sex or appearance. Priority for intelligence or obedience. As you selected options, you'd be confronted by the same characteristics rearranged. Priority for intelligence or appearance, priority for subdued or sex, and so on. It took me near an hour to go through them all. By the end, I barely remember what I'd even chosen. Once I was finally done, I was directed to a payment page, and much like everything else, it wasn't at all what I expected it to be. The payment was to be made through a company I'd never heard of, but I was relieved to see that there were a range of payment options. Credit card, thankfully, was one, but there were other options. Soul Express, Harvest Goods. I had never heard of these before. I clicked on Harvest Goods just for fun, since why not, and quickly realized the payment could be made in 238 fresh human hearts or 375 minor organs. A sick kind of joke that made me even more suspicious of the site. As I clicked back, I assumed that Soul Express would be asking for souls. After I'd finished fooling around with the various payment options, I chose the monetary one. So, how much does a wife cost? Well, that depends. You could pay $2.5 million US for 1 year of contract, $10 million for 5 years, $45 million for 25 years, or $1.3 billion for a lifetime. Looking over my options, I considered how long I might need to build a proper case. 1 year wasn't going to be enough. I just had a hope that 5 would. My wallet stung as I selected the option for $10 million US, and I felt a heavy disappointment settle in when the following page stated, "Thank you for your time and generous contribution. Please wait as we process your request. This may take 7 to 90 business days to complete." A few weeks passed before I accepted the fact that I had been scammed. My friends and I drank to my stupidity while my bank account slowly recovered. It was around this time that I received another email. "Your order is ready for shipment." I was confused a moment before I remembered my order for a wife, and opened the email to find out that she was apparently due to arrive the following Tuesday, and I should ensure I'm home to receive the order. When Tuesday arrived, I waited anxiously. Was something or someone really going to show up? I didn't know exactly, and I realized when I thought about it that I had never even given an address. When the knock on the door came, I'm not ashamed to say that I jumped a little. But by the time I reached the door, there was no person there. Just a 2 by 3 foot rectangular box. It was cardboard and definitely didn't look like anyone could fit in it. I picked it up to carry it inside and immediately noticed that it was impossibly heavy. So much so that I couldn't get more than a step or two with it at a time, and mostly ended up dragging it inside. There were no labels on it at all, no instructions, no delivery address, or return address. Though I didn't pay too much attention or notice to it at the time, as I was focused on opening it quickly. I didn't want whoever might be inside to suffocate, but I also didn't want to stab them with the letter opener I was using either. To my suspicion, once I got the cardboard open, I found a plastic drum. It was a blue container with brownish red symbols written onto the inner cardboard surroundings. I didn't recognize any meaning in them, but felt for sure they were written in blood. Once my initial shock passed, I hurried to open the drum, only to find a letter with instructions stuck to the top. It read, "Congratulations on receiving your new partner. Please follow these instructions very carefully as DOA refunds are not available. Step 1. Prepare a suitable space. Bathrooms are ideal. Pour a minimum of 80 gallons or 303 liters of water into a suitable container. Ensure no light, artificial or otherwise, is allowed into the room. If you do not have a suitable space, do not open the drum until one can be provided. Step 2. Take your drum into the dark room and remove the lid carefully. Please ensure no light during this process. Pour the contents of the drum into the provided 80 gallons, 303 liters, or more of water. Step 3. Leave your partner to grow for exactly 168 hours. You may collect your partner when the express time period has passed. Please note, some light sensitivity is to be expected within the first week. Should you have any concerns or questions, please refrain from contacting our administration. All the information you should need is listed within the provided manual. After reading the letter, I eyed the drum suspiciously. In return, it sat there, unmoving. Was I really about to do this? My bathroom was too well lit, but the cellar would be perfect. Admittedly, it didn't take me too long to decide to give it a try. What did I have to lose? I'd already paid my $10 million, and curiosity was burning me up. It was only a 10-minute trip to the store and back to purchase an above-ground pool. Just one of those tarp ones propped up by bracing. It was nearly 100 gallons, so I figured it would work. I spent the afternoon setting everything up and waited until nightfall to blindly roll the barrel down the dark hallway into a pitch-black room. It did roll down the stairs rather violently, and I scrambled quickly to find it, though it seemed intact when I did. From there, I followed the instructions to the letter. The contents of the barrel smelled absolutely terrible when I opened it, and it plopped into the water with lumpy splashes, which only seemed to amplify the stench. I left the room gladly and put a towel at the bottom of the door to prevent any light from entering under the door. And now, I'm just waiting. It's been 3 days. I have another 4 to go. I don't know what I'm expecting. I don't know why I'm even crazy enough to try this. I'm writing this now just in case something goes wrong. At least that way someone has some idea of what happened. Wish me luck. Part 2. To begin this time, I thought I'd answer some of your more pressing questions. I work in the import-export business and have had several investments running as well. I'm also really good at saving, and I'm an only child, so when my father died a few years back, getting his inheritance helped out a lot. Next, to add some context, I'm kind of a feminine guy. I can't grow a beard to save my life, and I'm skinny, but I'll work out so I don't look too emaciated. Basically, my friends have a running joke that I look like a twink. In the same vein, I also have a low sex drive, to the point where I'm almost asexual, and yes, this has had an impact on my previous relationships. This is important to know because it'll help explain the preferences I set for my wife when ordering. I basically prioritized appearance above all, then intelligence, and sex was the last out of the top 3. I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but I wanted a trophy housewife. You know, someone insanely beautiful that I could show off at work functions, but still be able to come home to a clean house and cooked meals. How I expected whatever was brewing in the darkness of my cellar to form into this wonder girl of a wife, I've got no idea. The only thing I can say was I was relieved when I found out that it at least didn't seem to be a 14-year-old human trafficking victim. Better some dark magic or backwards experimental science than an innocent. However, after I'd followed all the instructions, I found myself going through various stages of uncertainty. Firstly, I wondered if I was completely insane. I had bought something online from a less than reputable looking website after clicking a bait ad email. Paid a large sum of money to some unknown entity that, by the way, showed up on my card statement as paid to Satan, which was obviously someone's idea of an edgy company name. And now, whatever I had received was growing in my basement. The smell alone was bad enough. It had been bad when I first poured into the water. However, within a day, it was completely insufferable. The smell permeated through the towel at the bottom of the door and wafted slowly into the rest of the house. For my own benefit, I avoided areas of the house that were affected, and it's needless to say I didn't invite any guests over. There was only one thing in my entire life that I had smelled that was similar, and that was the rotten fluids of a stillborn baby delivered naturally after it had died inside the mother a couple weeks earlier. At this point, the idea that I was maybe being punked crossed my mind. I heard of a couple people buying mystery boxes off the deep web, only to find chunks of dead animals and barbed wire inside. I thought that my situation wasn't too dissimilar. If that were the case, I wasn't sure I wanted to go check on whatever was going on down there. What if I turned on the lights and it was just a few chunks of human flesh bobbing around? How on earth would I explain this to anyone, let alone the police? This was about the time the paranoia set in. It was as if the air inside my house had gotten heavier. It pressed down on me with a sticky humidity no matter how low I set the air conditioner. I felt myself eyeballing the mailman as he walked past and peering out of the curtains at pedestrians walking down the sidewalk. Somehow, I felt like I was doing something deeply wrong and that everyone in the outside world knew about it. Mostly though, I was worried that they smelled a rancid odor from outside. Then I began to wonder if I wasn't being messed with. How would whatever was coming out of that barrel turn into a wife? Was I part of some government experiment? My curiosity got the better of me once again, and I decided to go to the cellar door and see if I could hear anything. So, while holding my breath, that's exactly what I did. I walked down the hallway slowly and pressed my ear against the door. At first, I couldn't hear anything. Then I realized there was a quiet sloshing sound, as if the water was being moved around slightly. Both surprised and unsettled, I recoiled from the door and in doing so made the mistake of breathing in. I'm not ashamed to say I threw up then and there, as the smell assaulting my nostrils with a vengeance. After that, I decided it was best to wait a while before attempting to go near it again, though soon it became unnecessary as I began hearing the sounds in the cellar without having to get close. Initially, they began so faint I wasn't sure whether or not they were real, but with time they became louder and unmistakable. There was splashing and occasional indecipherable words coming from the cellar. When I would lay awake in the dim of my room, on the other side of the house, I would hear it. The garbled sounds of something horrendous, developing in wet darkness, with groans of agony and unintelligible mumbling. To ease my nerves, I began to play music through the house, just loud enough to match the sounds, but quiet enough to have my neighbors not call the cops on me. When the day finally came and the timer counted down to mere hours, I began to panic. If there were preparations to be made, I wasn't sure what they were. I managed to find some of my ex's old clothes, assuming that my new wife would need something to wear, and I bought a decent stock of food, though I was unsure if whatever was down there would even be able to eat, and was assuming it wasn't going to make its first meal me. Then, made up a bed in the guest room and paced around anxiously until the timer showed 10 minutes. Then, I reluctantly grabbed a towel and made my way to the basement. As I approached the door, I noticed the horrible smell from earlier was no longer there. My heart raced, pumping blood to my veins so fast that my hand was shaking as I put it on the doorknob, and I could taste the adrenaline in the back of my throat. Swallowing my anxiety, I watched the final seconds count down on the timer and opened the door. I creaked it open slowly, letting the light from behind fall onto the stairs before me. This was the only patch of light, and it only served to heighten the contrast of the room so that I couldn't see anything past it. Hello? Is anything alive down here? Please don't eat me, I called, trying to make it sound like I was joking to hide the pure terror I felt looking into the pitch-black nothingness beyond the light. There was no answer to my question, so I cautiously made my way down the stairs. The instructions had suggested that my new wife would be sensitive to light, so keeping this in mind, I didn't turn on the overhead lights. Instead, used the torch app on my phone to light the rest of the way. When I neared the pool, I held the light up to see a set of reflective eyes above the water surface looking back at me. For a brief moment, I thought I had grown an alligator or something. However, upon regaining my composure and cautiously peering at it again, I realized there was a woman in the water. She was sitting with only her eyes above it, and had long black hair floating around her in the perfectly still, calm water. Being confronted with what seemed like an actual human being, and not knowing what else to do, I introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Jake," I said uncertainly. When she didn't answer, I continued awkwardly. I bought you." She still made no comment, only watched me with her eyes as I moved a little closer. "Do you want to come out now?" The instructions said. I didn't get to finish my sentence as she started to get up. Picture this if you can. She was stark naked, uncoordinated, and with seemingly disproportionate limbs, half crawling, half dragging herself out of a kiddie pool, like something from The Exorcist, slipping and crawling her way to dry land. Had I not been so utterly petrified, I might have fled the fucking country with my export containers. Instead, I stood there frozen, looking at this humanoid heap of a woman crawling her way toward me on the floor. Her hair was long enough that it clung to her body, covering her shoulders and breasts, better than I would have expected it to. Not that it really mattered, as I was too horrified to really pay attention to her nakedness, past knowing her skin was pale, and the once clean water running off of it had a reddish tint. As she reached me, she stopped by my feet and looked up at me, twisting her neck at a horrible angle to do so, before opening her mouth to gargle out a strangled-sounding "Jake." I nearly gagged then. Bloody water dribbled out from her nose and mouth through pointed shark-like teeth as she spoke, then reached up for me. Still in shock and not knowing what else, I offered her the towel. She didn't take it, didn't even try to take it, so I awkwardly draped it around her and helped her stand up. Her skin was cold to the touch, smooth, almost reptilian, and she was comfortably shorter than me. This is only significant in the fact that it had been a preference that I selected when ordering her. The comfortably shorter part, I mean, not the reptilian part. When she made no attempt to eat or otherwise maim me, I started to lead her upstairs to the light. She squinted and blinked, turning her face away from the brightness with a low growl, so I dimmed the lights. However, dim light was better than my phone flashlight, so that was when I was able to properly see her features. Body-wise, she looked nice. Hourglass shape despite her arms being a little gangly. Probably C-cup breasts, so nothing overbearing, and her facial features were generally Asianish. Dark, almond-shaped eyes with long lashes, petite nose and mouth. And as I looked at her, I realized she actually resembled my ex in a weird, just screwed this in my basement from a tub of unidentified parts kind of way. I mean, the match wasn't exact, but they could have been sisters or something. Other things of note are that her skin was even more pale than I had thought. I'd even go as far to say it had an almost iridescent quality to its whiteness, and her eyes had no contrast. They were fully black. And when I say black, I mean extremely black, like oil, where different colors were reflected in them. Her toe and fingernails were much the same, oily black, but also long and curved like a predator's claws. Once we made it to the kitchen, I sat her down and asked, "Are you hungry? Thirsty maybe?" while offering her a glass of water. There was a long pause as she stared at me, before she murmured something so quiet I didn't catch it the first time. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I asked hesitantly, leaning in closer to hear her better. Without looking away from me, she repeated herself, slowly, and purposefully. "Hungry," she whispered, her voice scratchy and dry. I felt my heart drop a little at this point. Of course my new wife was hungry. Maybe she liked to eat my liver with some fava beans and nice Chianti. If nothing else, I was pretty certain she was about to demand that I sacrifice some virgins to satiate her appetite, but she gave no further instructions, so I did my best. The answer to my uncertainty came in the form of a grilled cheese sandwich, which she ate when I presented it to her, so I assumed it wasn't not on the menu. To be perfectly honest at this point, I didn't know what to do. I hadn't truly been expecting a living being to come from the drum of unidentified lumpy liquid poured into water and left stewing in darkness. Yet here it or she was. However, after eating, she looked tired, so I took her to the guest room and let her lay down. She didn't seem to know what to do with the bedding, and so she ended up sort of awkwardly on top of the bed, where I folded the sheets over her. I left the room fairly swiftly after that, locking it behind me. To say that this isn't what I ordered is an understatement. It wasn't even human for all I could tell. In trying to get some understanding of what she was, I decided to go to the basement and look for the water she'd been in. This time I turned on the overhead light and went down to take a look. As I approached the pool, I saw that the water had settled into 2 layers. The top layer was mostly clear and looked to be just water, while at the bottom a thick reddish-brown sediment had formed. To see if there's anything hidden at the bottom, I decided to stir up the water with the broom handle and drain out as much as I could. Now, I would like to point out that the water didn't start to smell until I disturbed it. Then I could smell the familiar pungent odor of something unspeakable rotting, and to my horror, I could feel the broom clatter against something at the bottom beneath the filth. Without thinking, I reached down into the murky water to retrieve whatever it was, assuming something ordinary had fallen in at some point, only to find myself holding a bone. It looked like a human femur, and yes, I did throw up again. By the time the pool had drained, I found a collection of bones, all of which I'm sure were human. A dead crow, a variety of insect husks, and some waterlogged herbs. I'll spare you most of the details regarding how I disposed of the items, except to say that it wasn't easy, and it took most of the night until I passed out right after. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my surround sound TV blasting out advertisements, and I sprang out to check on the guest bedroom. When I reached it, the door was open, the lock broken, and she wasn't anywhere to be seen. To say this was unsettling would be an understatement. I took the umbrella off the coat hanger in the hallway and made my way towards the sound of the TV. As I approached, I could hear talking. Not just from the ads, but more like talking as if someone's trying to do a voice check. The pitch and tone would change as the words were said in different orders. It sounded similar to a deaf person speaking, only what words were becoming clear with repetition. I made my way to the kitchen and saw in the sink that there was a mess of blood and teeth in it. Unsure of what to make of that, and entirely unable to process it, I mostly ignored that detail and continued onto the home theater. When I reached it and rounded the corner, I saw the person speaking was her. From what I could tell, she was trying to practice speaking, and when she noticed me, she turned to face me with a crooked kind of smile. To my surprise, her teeth were normal, and suddenly the mess in the sink made a little more sense. Had she pulled them out to grow new human ones? The next thing I noticed that her skin tone was more human and no longer iridescent. In addition to this, her limbs were now proportionate, her nails manicured, and her eyes weren't fully black anymore, though the irises were still a little too big. Good morning, she greeted me, though looked puzzled as to why I was holding the umbrella. The most important meal of the
A's prepared," she announced, gesturing to the table where there was a bowl of cereal, overfilled with milk, waiting for me. I stared between her and the drowned cereal for a moment, while she stood there unblinking, waiting for me to sit down and eat. Not wanting to anger her, I did sit down and poke around the soggy breakfast, but she didn't seem to mind as she turned back to the TV. In the few days following, she continued to improve, I suppose you could say. Her voice and speech patterns got more normal. I taught her to read, and her meal-making abilities improved. By all counts, she was now perfectly human. I haven't told my friends about her yet, but last night was the first night we shared a bed. We didn't do anything, if that's what you're thinking, so I can't comment on that. However, I will say that she smells amazing. Her hair, her skin, it's indescribable. I think I love her. I find myself forgetting how she started out as. That's why I thought making this was important. She's just so alluring now. I want to do things for her. I don't want to go to work so I can spend more time with her. My phone keeps ringing, but so far I've been ignoring it. Last night I just stood by it and let it ring out. I did listen to the voice message though. It was Brayden. He was complaining about not having seen me in a while, and was apparently calling to let me know that my ex, I forgot her name now, has been reported missing. Part 3. As some of you may know, I bought a wife online not too long ago. It started off as a joke, but it's not so funny now. In the few weeks following my wife's birth, creation, spawning, not sure exactly what to call it, she became the perfect wife. There were, of course, minor glitches. For example, as I mentioned before, she had to learn how to speak in a natural manner. Next became her behavior. Small things like blinking occasionally rather than burning holes into people's souls with unintentional death stares, or fluttering her eyelids like she was having a seizure when people greeted her. We also had fun learning about simple movement mechanics like reflexes. For her moving aside when objects were inbound for impact wasn't a consideration, and yes, it was a little awkward explaining to the kids next door when my wife stood motionless as a stray football smacked her square in the face. It turned out okay though. They just thought she was super metal. In the generic public, I found she blended in quite well and could play off most of her strangeness as a horrific sense of humor. Though I still don't trust her to shop alone. The first day I had taken her to the supermarket, I asked her to grab some cheese while I got some bread. I came back to the cart overflowing with cheese and emptied refrigerator shelves. She also tended to ask if we needed whatever she'd spotted on the shelf, as she was already loading several of them into the cart. "No, sweetie, we don't need 4 can openers," was a regular conversation we had. Though when she answered me once with a sly smile saying, "Aren't I always supposed to be right?" I had doubts whether or not she was actually joking with me or not. In terms of homely things, and again, I don't mean to sound like a jerk here, she was great. In fact, she did more than I expected her to. She kept record for me of important dates like bill payments. It was sort of like having a secretary, I suppose. The house was perfectly clean. Breakfast was made by the time I got out of the shower every morning. Lunch was prepared and packed before I went to work, and dinner was on the table when I came home. Her meals were wonderful. The first few were a little charred, sure. So a few cooking shows later, she was a master chef. One weekend, I woke up early to treat her to breakfast before she could make it for me, but my gesture only made her fret, and no amount of my assurance could calm her. She was very insistent that she should be the one to make meals for me, not the other way around. I'm not sure where she got that from. I don't remember selecting a will be a flawless 80s housewife in my preferences.
Maybe she picked it up from the TV, since she liked to watch a bit of the older sitcoms. Nothing really unusual changed, to be perfectly honest. My phone battery shut itself, the damn thing stopped holding a charge, and I had a bit more of an appetite, probably because her cooking was so nice. And I was a little more tired these days, though I was working a lot harder during the day so I could be home at a reasonable time in the evening. However, as we were settling down for dinner after work on a Friday, there was a rather intrusive knock on the door. Begrudgingly, I got up to answer it. I really just wanted to eat, and here was someone interrupting my meal. As it turned out, it was Brayden. He pushed past me into the house with a, "Yo, I haven't seen you in ages. Did you get my messages? Where have you been? What's that smell?" he asked, his lip curling up in disgust. Feigned disgust, that is, I'm sure, as the only smell that filled my home at the moment was my wife's cooking. Confused, I shook my head. "I've been working. I didn't get any messages," I told him, then hesitated. "Oh, I got one. Someone's missing?" I asked, following after him as he seemed to be trying to locate the source of whatever he was smelling. "Yeah, man, Zoe. She's missing. Her family said they've been trying to call you. Didn't you get their messages?" he asked, looking at me like I was crazy. "Who's Zoe?" I queried, confused. "Ha, very funny. You know Zoe, your recent ex-girlfriend," he reminded me, and then it clicked, like a small piece of a puzzle I'd been missing, and it came back to me. "Oh, yeah, right. I've just been busy, man. I haven't got any messages. I stopped as Brady interrupted me suddenly. "Yo, who the hell is this?" he shrieked, recoiling from the kitchen, startled. It took me a second to realize he'd found my wife. Brayden, meet Alice, my wife," I introduced him, as he stared at her, dumbfounded. "A pleasure to meet you." Alice paused a smile as she greeted him. She was dutifully covering our dinner plates with tinfoil to preserve them, knowing the food would get cold as Brayden and I spoke. There was a long moment where he just didn't say anything. He paced back and forth for a moment, casting glances at Alice, then myself, before throwing up his arms and asking, "When'd you get married exactly? 'Cause I don't remember no wedding." I realized then that I hadn't mentioned anything to him, or explained anything. It didn't occur to me that I had to. It felt to me like Alice had always been part of my life, and I struggled to remember that she only arrived recently. Oh, yeah, you're gonna love this. Remember when we were joking about buying a wife? Well, I actually got an email advertising wives. I clicked on it and I gestured to my wife. She arrived. Marriage papers included. All I had to do was sign them. In my explanation, I of course left out the whole brewing in my basement thing. He paused again. Hold up. You mean to say that you clicked on some dodgy ass email, ordered a waifu online, and this is what you got? Yeah, I mean, it was a lot more involved than that, but yeah, that's basically it. I agree with a nonchalant shrug, even though he didn't seem at all reassured. You gotta get rid of that thing. It ain't right. She looks like Zoe and she's missing. It's a big fat no, brother. He warned, shaking his head at me and backing away from Alice. His reaction, I thought, was unreasonable. I have to get rid of it? And that thing isn't right? Who did he think he was talking about? Alice was a person with rights and feelings. I wasn't gonna put up with this kind of rudeness towards my wife. I asked him to leave, telling him he wasn't allowed to come back until he apologized. He didn't seem too fussed. I'm telling you, it ain't right. Take her to the police or something. Drop her off somewhere. Ain't nothing good coming from those scam emails. He rattled on his way out the door. I'd be watching what she's feeding you too. You look a little thin, he added. Seriously, not funny, was all I said in return through my teeth. I was angry. Unbelievably angry. I'd never been so angry. Part of me genuinely wanted to kill him as I slammed the door shut behind him. Where has all this anger come from? It wasn't like me. Alice and I made love for the first time that night. Something about the strong emotions put me in the mood, and it seemed like she just fell out of her clothes. I will mention, since I'm sure some of you are morbidly interested, that she was amazing in the sheets. I won't go into too much detail except to say that she did things better than I had ever experienced before, and that it was, without a doubt, the best sex I'd ever had. In the following days, I heard nothing else from Braden. It seemed he was unwilling to apologize, and I brushed it off with a whatever dude kind of attitude about it. I also got a new phone, since the old one was all but useless if I was missing messages, but soon noticed that it seemed to have a battery issue too, so I took it back for service. They told me at the store it was going to be a day or two until they send it away and sort it out, but I'd be without a phone until then. That didn't really bother me, though as soon as I sat down for lunch the next day, I did feel a stab of regret, as it meant I wasn't going to get the usual "hope you're having a great day" smiley face text from Alice. Thinking of Alice and my phone naturally led my thoughts astray, replaying what Braden had said to me. "I'd be watching what she's feeding you too. You look a little thin." I'm not sure why that came to me, as I was just about to have a bite of a sandwich Alice had prepared for me, but I did find myself eyeballing the sandwich suspiciously. It seemed fine, just your standard lettuce and chicken between 2 slices of whole grain bread and mayonnaise. Nothing obviously harmful, so I can't explain why I threw it in the small trash can beside my desk and ordered from a little stand from across the street. As I ate my non-wife prepared food, I felt kind of strange. It made me feel sick to eat it, and I realized I was all but inhaling it. Why was I suddenly so hungry? I mean, I was more often than not hungry these days, but this was different. I was eating like a starving dog. Because of this, I picked up some takeaway on the way home after work and ate it before I got home. When I arrived, I instantly felt guilty. Alice already had dinner on the table for me. I apologized profusely, telling her that I just felt so full from the sandwich that I didn't need anything else and went to bed early. She didn't join me right away as she usually would have. I assumed that was because I made her mad by refusing dinner, but when she did, I could feel her glaring daggers at the back of my head. In the morning, I got up early and left without having breakfast. I went straight to the store to see if my phone was repaired. I doubted it would be, I just wanted to get out of the house really. I was surprised to learn that it was in fact ready to go. The guy at the store handed it back to me without really saying anything, just that it was fixed, so I asked what had been wrong with it. He hesitated a moment, as if trying to decide how to best approach the subject. "There was nothing wrong with it, the battery just needed to be charged," he said carefully, and I could tell he was doing his best to not outright call me an imbecile for not knowing how to charge my own phone. Needless to say, this confused me. I had put my phone on the charger every night, checked the switch was on, and done all the right things, and yet each morning I wake up with it having only 5 to 6% battery. A wave of nausea swept over me as I considered that maybe, just maybe, Alice was unplugging it as I went to sleep, and plugged it back in as soon as I woke up each morning. Looking at the phone, I saw that I had a decent amount of unread texts and voicemails, and that they were all recent, with the oldest messages being from just after I dropped off my phone for repairs. Had Alice been deleting my messages? Were these only here now because she didn't have access to my phone? This paranoia swirled inside my mind every second for the rest of the day. At work, I listened to a couple voicemails. One in particular stood out. It was from Braden.
"Hey man, look, I'm sorry about the other day. I'm really happy for you, I don't know man, she freaks me out. Her eyes are all cold, and the way she looks like Zoe. I mean, I know you got a type, bro, but isn't it just a little weird how she shows up all Zoe look-alike and all, just when Zoe goes missing? Anyways, that's all I gotta say. We'll talk soon, yeah? I said I was sorry. Give me a call when you get this. Bye, bro."
I didn't call him back, but his message certainly stayed with me. It made me remember the discarded sandwich from the day before. Curious, I leaned over my desk to check its position in the bin, and to my horror, I saw it was growing unnatural pink tendrils that pulsated and struggled to haul themselves out of the trash. Disturbed, I drove home in silence with my thoughts, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, I decided that I needed to confront my wife. She could speak and reason. Surely we can talk this through, get it sorted out. Apparently, she had come to the same conclusion as I had, because when I walked through the door, she was waiting for me in the lounge with her arms folded and no dinner on the table. The universal sign of a pissed-off wife.
"You left today without breakfast, without even saying goodbye," she began immediately.
Okay, yes, I agreed. But before I could continue, she said,
"All you have to say is, okay, yes?"
She yelled, offended, and she took in another breath to yell some more. I took my chance. "You've been taking my phone off the charger and deleting my messages, and I don't even know what you've been feeding me," I blurted out, without any tact whatsoever. This caused her to pause. Her mouth snapped shut, and she stared at me, unblinking, so I continued. "What are you?" I asked with dry lips. "Where did you come from, and why do you look like Zoe?" In response, she now smiled. She smiled a smile that grew. It spread slowly across her perfect red lips until her teeth were showing. It then stretched out impossibly wider. I heard the skin on either side of her lips tear as her head tilted back at a right angle and her jaw began to open impossibly wide, revealing that inside her mouth is lined with rows of curved teeth leading down the black abyss of her throat. From her back, her spine seemed to crawl outward. From her back, her spine seemed to crack outward, breaking the skin and allowing malnourished arms covered in a slimy red fluid to push violently through her shirt. Some men might imagine that the worst part about confronting their wives would be the possibility that she could leave them. For me, the worst part was watching her eyes bulge and split into more eyes, like rapidly dividing cells. I stood, unable to move as she transformed from the beautiful Alice into this thing. And once it was done, she turned to me, her multiple eyes all somehow focusing on me. If balls can shrink, mine did in that moment. "Are you sorry now, Jake?" my wife demanded in a mocking tone. Her voice no longer sweet, but deep and raspy. I tried to answer her, but my mouth was too dry to form words. Around me, I noticed the walls of my home were covered in fleshy webs. I understood then that she was a parasite, grown from a putrid recipe, and finally, I were able to speak. "Yes, I am very sorry," I whispered, and this time, I knew what I was apologizing for. I was apologizing for ordering her online, for growing her in my basement, for ever daring I've raised my voice at her. There was an agonizingly long moment before the word came to me. "Good," she purred, long and low, her form now clicking back into place, sickening sets of cracks and snaps to return to the woman I had become accustomed to seeing.
"You will be a husband to me. I look like Zoe because she was your optimum match, and her nutrients feed me well."
She now answered my questions politely, as her tattered clothes reminded me of what she would become if I had displeased her. Right. Yeah, that makes sense," I agreed, unsure of what else to do. My mind couldn't quite accept that I may have poured my ex's bones into the broth with whatever else to now make this thing that stood before me.
And Jake, if you have a problem with my cooking, you only need to say so,"
she said pleasantly with a smile that made me flinch.
"I'll see what I can do to change it."
Marriage is hard. As it stands, I have 4 years, 10 months, and 2 weeks of marriage contract left. She wants children. All I can say is I am truly sorry.